Every person in Europe shares the same ancestor. Not a king, not a prophet, a herder from the steppe. 5,000 years ago, a population of cattle herders lived on the grasslands between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. They had no writing, no cities, no monuments, just cattle, horses, and wagons. A people defined not by what they built, but by how far they moved. They buried their dead under earthen mounds called kurgans, sprinkled the bodies with red ochre, and moved on. Within a few centuries, their DNA would be in every person on the continent. They are called the Yamnaya, and their story is the single most important genetic event in European history. They emerged around 3300 BCE. Within 7 centuries, they were everywhere. Every kurgan they left behind contains the same story: red ochre supine burial. A pastoral people on the move. In 2015, a landmark study led by Wolfgang Hock analyzed ancient DNA from across Europe. The results showed something no one had predicted at that scale. A third ancestral component appeared in every Bronze Age sample, and it came from the East. It appeared in every region tested: Central Europe, Scandinavia, the British Isles, Iberia. Everywhere. Before 3000 BCE, Europeans were a mix of 2 ancestral populations: Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who had lived in Europe since the Ice Age, and Neolithic farmers who had migrated from Anatolia starting around 7000 BCE. The first farmers walked into Europe carrying wheat, barley, and a new way of life. Their DNA would become the foundation layer of European genetics for 4,000 years. Those two groups had been mixing for thousands of years. Europe's genetic story seemed settled. 4,000 years of gradual blending. A continent slowly becoming one genetic community. Then, the equilibrium shattered. Something was coming from the east, and it would change the genetic map of Europe forever. Then, around 3000 BCE, a third population arrived, and it changed everything. The Yamnaya expansion was not a trickle. It was a flood. Entire communities moved westward. Families, livestock, wagons, not raiders, but settlers. The wheel gave them range. The horse gave them speed. The wagon gave them the ability to move entire households. They moved into Central Europe, into Scandinavia, into Britain. Within 3 centuries, corded ware communities blanketed northern Europe from the Rhine to the Volga, from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains. One archaeological culture spanning an entire continent. Every corded ware burial tested carries steppe ancestry. The cultural and genetic signals arrived together. The battle axe became their signature, a weapon and a symbol of the steppe identity transplanted to Europe. Their pottery and battle axes appeared in graves from Holland to Finland, and within a few centuries, their genetic signature was everywhere. In Central Europe, roughly 75% of the gene pool was replaced. The archaeological record shows the transition. New pottery styles, new burial customs, new DNA. In Britain, it was 90%. The island's entire population was nearly erased. The people who built Stonehenge were genetically replaced within a few centuries of the Yamnaya-descended Beaker people arriving. The Olalda study sequenced over 400 ancient individuals. The British data was devastating. The builders vanished genetically. The stones remained. 5,000 tons of stone raised by a population that would be replaced within generations. The Beaker people who inherited Stonehenge had no genetic connection to the people who built it. Avebury, Silbury Hill, West Kennet Long Barrow, all Neolithic, all built by people whose genes barely survive. Even in Southern Europe, where the replacement was less extreme, the steppe signal appeared in every population tested. Iberia, Italy, Greece, the Balkans. Every region received some Yamnaya ancestry. No European alive today is free of it. Not one. Even the Basques, long considered Europe's most isolated population, carry roughly 20% steppe ancestry. The Pyrenees slowed the steppe wave, but they did not stop it. The Sardinians, another famously isolated population, carry a smaller but measurable steppe contribution. No mountain was high enough. No island was remote enough. The steppe DNA reached everywhere. Islands delayed the arrival. Mountains slowed it, but nothing stopped it. Sardinia held out longest. Its Neolithic farmer ancestry persisted at higher levels than anywhere on the mainland. But even Sardinia eventually received the steppe signal, diluted, delayed, but present. Central Europe fell first, Scandinavia next, Britain after that, Southern Europe last. But all of them fell. But here is the part nobody talks about. The replacement was not equal between men and women. The Y chromosome passed from father to son was almost completely replaced. Before the Yamnaya arrived, European men carried diverse Y chromosome lineages, GRAIT. After the migration, one lineage dominated, R1b, carried by the steppe newcomers. Today, R1b is the most common Y chromosome in Western Europe, over 8% in some regions. Every man in Ireland, Wales, or the Basque country carrying R1b inherited it from the same Bronze Age steppe expansion. But the mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child tells a different story. The maternal lineages of Neolithic Europe survived. Not all of them, but enough. The women stayed. The men were replaced. The Neolithic women who survived the transition carried their ancestors' DNA forward into the New World. Her face is gone from the archaeological record, but her mitochondrial DNA is in millions of living Europeans. Haplogroups H, K, T, and J, Neolithic maternal lineages that survived the Bronze Age catastrophe. The mothers passed their lineages through the daughters, generation after generation, even as the world around them transformed. This is the fingerprint of a male-dominated conquest. Steppe men married local women. Their children carried steppe Y chromosomes from their fathers and Neolithic mitochondrial DNA from their mothers. Within 5 or 6 generations, every child in the region carried both ancestries. The blend became the baseline. But the Yamnaya didn't just bring their genes. They brought something even more lasting. They brought the ancestor of almost every language spoken in Europe today. English, Spanish, Russian, Hindi, Greek, German, French, all descended from Proto-Indo-European. And the DNA evidence now strongly supports the steppe hypothesis. The Yamnaya expansion carried the language westward. The linguistic and genetic evidence converge on the same origin point, the Pontic steppe 5,000 years ago. 3 independent lines of evidence, all pointing to the same grassland between 2 seas. The debate is not settled, but the genetic evidence has shifted the balance decisively toward the steppe. Genetics, archaeology, and linguistics increasingly agree. The steppe is the origin. Where the steppe DNA went, Indo-European languages followed. The correlation is nearly perfect. One migration gave Europe its dominant genes and its dominant languages, both at once. They also brought the wheel, the domesticated horse bronze metallurgy, the technological package that transformed Europe from a Neolithic farming world into the Bronze Age. Every major technological innovation of early Bronze Age Europe arrived with the steppe migrants. Before them, stone tools and ox-drawn plows. After them, bronze weapons and horse-drawn chariots. The horse changed everything: speed, range, and military advantage that no farming community could match. Horses were first domesticated on the steppe. The Yamnaya inherited the advantage. And plague. They brought plague. Ancient DNA has identified Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium, in Yamnaya-era burials. The steppe herders carried plague. It may have cleared the way before they even arrived. Researchers have found plague DNA in Neolithic European skeletons, dating to just before the Yamnaya arrival. The Neolithic farming population may have been decimated by disease, before the steppe migrants arrived. If the population was already weakened, a relatively small number of incoming steppe families could dominate the survivors, not through warfare alone, through demographics. Healthy immigrants outbreeding a weakened local population, plague, horses, bronze, and language. The Yamnaya brought a complete civilization package. But here is the twist. The Yamnaya themselves were not a pure population. Their DNA was a roughly equal mix of two older populations, Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. Two populations that had been separated for thousands of years met on the steppe and merged. The Yamnaya were themselves the product of a migration and a merger. A mixed people who then mixed again with everyone they encountered. Their Caucasus ancestors had been separated from their Eastern European ancestors for over 20,000 years. The Yamnaya were the reunion of two ancient branches of humanity, and their children would populate a continent. The ancestor of every European was already a hybrid. Purity was never part of the story. And the deeper researchers dig, the more complex the picture becomes. Every modern European carries DNA from all three ancestral populations: hunter-gatherers, farmers, steppe herders. No population is purely one thing. The proportions vary, the mix is universal. The science of ancient DNA has made one thing clear. There are no pure Europeans. There never were. Every border on a political map cuts through a continuous genetic gradient. The French and the Germans shared the same three ancestors. So do the Spanish and the Swedes. 4 nations, 4 languages, 4 cultures, 3 shared ancestors. Genetic borders and political borders have almost nothing in common. A Finn and a Sicilian share the same 3 ancestors, just in different proportions. The Finn carries more steppe and hunter-gatherer ancestry. The Sicilian carries more Neolithic farmer, but both carry all 3. The Yamnaya contribution is in everyone. Minimum 15% steppe ancestry in the most isolated Southern Europeans. Maximum 90% in parts of Northern Europe. 5,000 years later, their DNA is in every single person on the continent. What does this mean for how we think about European identity? It means there is no original European. There are 3 original Europeans, and all of them came from somewhere else. The hunter-gatherers arrived from Africa tens of thousands of years ago. The farmers arrived from Anatolia 7,000 years ago, and the steppe herders arrived 5,000 years ago. 3 waves, 3 ancestries, 1 continent. Every European nation is built on the same 3 genetic layers. The proportions are the only difference. The Neolithic farmers who built the megaliths were not erased. Their maternal DNA survived the steppe invasion. The hunter-gatherers who painted the caves of Lascaux were not erased either. Their DNA persists at low but detectable levels. Everyone who came before contributed something. The Yamnaya just contributed the most, the largest single contributor to the modern European genome, but never the only one. The gradient tells the story. More steppe in the north, more farmer in the south, hunter-gatherer everywhere. Today, anyone in Europe who takes a DNA test will find all 3 ancestral components in their results. 3 populations, 1 genome, the mathematical proof that every European alive is a descendant of the steppe. And because they contributed to everyone, they became the universal ancestor. Not because they were superior, because they were everywhere. Somewhere on the steppe between the Black Sea and the Caspian, 5,000 years ago, a herder buried under a mound of earth and red ochre became the ancestor of a continent. No crown, no inscription, no monument, besides a pile of dirt. The most consequential burial in European history. And nobody knows their name. This is the face of the ancestor, reconstructed from ancient DNA. The most consequential unknown person in European history. 5,000 years dead. and still the genetic ancestor of every European alive. If every European shares one ancestor, what else does genetics say about the stories nations tell? Sources in the description. Subscribe if you want to see what DNA reveals next. Tell me in the comments which country's genetic history you want investigated next.